It's the worst attack in France since the Second World War. 8 gunmen killed at least 127 people in a series of coordinated shootings and bombings across Paris. So, where does France go from here? And how does the government restore a sense of security? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. It was just 10 months ago that the attacks on the offices of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo brought panic and bloodshed to the streets of Paris. Now, as the year draws to a close, Parisians are once again dealing with the fallout from an unprecedented act of violence that has killed at least 127 people and injured many more. They were the kind of well-planned and coordinated attacks that security agencies had long been worried about. The multiple use of automatic weapons and suicide bombers in attacks that happened almost simultaneously across one of Europe's largest capitals, targeting crowded public areas during the busy evening rush. The events have shocked France as millions around the world express their support and solidarity for the victims. We'll get to our discussion in just a moment on what these attacks will mean for France and its citizens and what, if anything, will change in the long term. But first, Al Jazeera's Niamh Barker has the latest from Paris.
A city under lockdown, a nation in mourning. France wakes up to a state of emergency. The front pages of national newspapers detailing the near-simultaneous gun and bomb attacks in and around Paris. In an address to the nation, French President François Hollande blamed ISIL, which some call Daesh.
La France, parce qu'elle a été agressée lâchement.
France was attacked in a violent, cowardly and shameful way. Because of this, it will not show any pity against the barbarians of Daesh. It will act within the law and use all the means possible and in all fields, in all areas, internally and externally, together with our allies who are themselves targeted by the terrorist threat.
The most number of people killed was at the Bataclan concert hall. The siege lasted for hours. Survivors say 4 gunmen stormed the building and fired systematically into the crowd. 3 set off suicide bombs when police raided. The 4th was killed.
We managed to escape through a door that was right on the stage, and we hid there for 2 hours. 25 people in a room, all stacked one against the other, crouching and hearing Kalashnikov shots. It was as if people were being tortured. They were hurt because they were being shot.
Gunmen also shot dead people at bars and restaurants in 5 other locations. Medical workers ferried victims to hospital throughout the night, and people have been told to stay indoors. Schools, universities and municipal buildings are to remain shut on Saturday.
Tonight it's a moment of pain, of tears, of grief, but Paris is still standing strong. I know the Parisians who've suffered because of what happened here tonight. Their thoughts will be with the victims.
Around 1,500 military personnel have been drafted in to patrol Paris, with President Hollande ordering tighter border controls. Earlier, Hollande had been at this football match between France and Germany. 2 explosions were heard outside the Stade de France, packed with 80,000 spectators. Crowds poured onto the pitch, first in disbelief as news from the other attacks rolled in, then later, defiance. La Marseillaise, thousands singing the French national anthem as they left the stadium. Since the attacks on the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in January, France has been on the highest state of alert, with troops patrolling key landmarks and sensitive targets like synagogues. But even with all of these precautions, now this, an organised attack against French civilians. It's very difficult to know what the country can do next to protect its citizens. Niamh Barker, Al Jazeera, Paris.
So, less than a year since the Charlie Hebdo killings shook France, but after Friday's attacks in the capital, questions are being asked if enough is being done. Security was tightened following those attacks. at the start of the year, with a higher number of police officers and even the army becoming a common sight on the streets of Paris. But the effectiveness of France's security policies have been questioned in the past few months, and whether more could have been done to avoid this latest string of attacks. The French were joined by world leaders in an unprecedented demonstration of unity and strength in January, a sense of unity that many say is vital if France is to avoid a breakdown in social cohesion and marginalisation of its minority communities. So, lots to discuss on today's Inside Story. Let's bring in our guests. From Paris, we're joined by Julien Théron, political scientist at the University of Versailles. From Amsterdam, Francesco Ragazzi, associate scholar at the Centre for International Studies and Research. And also from Paris, joining us via Skype, Virginie Guéraudon, research professor at the Centre for European Studies in Paris. Welcome to you all. Julien, let's pick up then with what I was saying just a few moments ago about social cohesion. What impact will these attacks have on social cohesion in France?
It's hard to say for the moment, but it's sure that after Charlie Hebdo, we actually brought the nation together with very peaceful demonstration, and we had a huge debate on freedom of expression. It was very productive for the nation, even though all the questions were not solved. And this terror attack intervened actually in this context, where the questions and the political agitation is not still over. And we have some elections ahead, so we have to see what the political leaders will gonna say, and it's already started. Yesterday, for instance, the far right started to say that France was building too many mosques, or that the government was acting against the National Front, the far-right party, and not actually against ISIS sufficiently. So you see that the debate already started.
Francesco, will Muslims in France now fear being associated with fanaticism and terror? Will the far-right in France gain further support after Friday's attacks?
One thing is for sure is that they will not start tomorrow, but they have started already. I think we have seen the backlash since the Charlie Hebdo attacks. The association between the Muslim population in France and terrorism has been ongoing. And I would like to say that it's not only from the far-right elements of society, but in a way, I think many Muslims in France are feeling a backlash from state institutions. When we remember that an 8-year-old child was brought to a police station for saying he was not Charlie after the attacks, I think that generated quite a bit of concern among the Muslim population in France.
Virginie, these attacks were meant to provoke suspicion, polarization between different communities. What will France have to do now to prevent that sort of thing happening?
Well, I must say, Charlie Hebdo, these attacks, I totally agree with what was just being said. I think Muslims have felt really abandoned after Charlie Hebdo. They have felt that suspicion was on all of them. This time, I think it's a bit different. I live in Paris. I'm from the neighborhood where many of the attacks took place in cafes. Yesterday, I spent the whole morning until now with friends who actually say, our neighborhood is a multicultural neighborhood with a lot of people from Arab origin living there, previously Jewish communities, a lot of, it's also a gentrified neighborhood, and they're attacking a way of life, which is actually a way of life of people who live together in the 11th arrondissement of Paris, just having a good time, going to cafes. And, I think their reaction was, they want to, we live together in this neighborhood. There's no opposition between Muslims and others. And hopefully that means the reaction will be slightly different. I think there was a great reaction from the government, and everybody said so last time after the Charlie Hebdo attack, during the very first days. I hope this time they will make sure that they don't forget, I think, Muslims who live outside in the suburbs who have felt abandoned.
Yeah.
I also will go back on the election. This time we are 1 month from a very important election where the National Front is likely to win some very important regions in France. And I listened to Mr. Sarkozy, our former president, this morning. He's really already campaigning. He's on the campaign trail, not just for the regional elections, for the presidential elections. I think there will not be necessarily the state of grace that there was last January. I'm more worried about politicians acting badly, I'm not worried about my citizens, friends, people have been calling from, all over the place, worrying about us.
Okay.
So there is social cohesion. I'm just worried about the politics of it.
Julien, what do you make of what you just heard there? President Hollande says that France is a country at war. How do you prevent France becoming a country that's at war with itself?
Well, we knew already that we were at war, but it was abroad, and what is coming actually is what a military and political analysts say, that terrorism brings actually the conflict inside the countries and not outside anymore as external operations. So, but I wouldn't agree to say that France has a population which is at war with itself. The Directorate General for Internal Security, DGSI, said actually that they were watching 3,000 people, radicalized people. So it's not much on a 60 million population. And what we have seen yesterday, if not the amount of demonstration like Charlie Hebdo, because it was very focused on a precise question, which was freedom of expression. But what we are still seeing is that a lot of the population actually continued their evening and said, like, they stayed in the cafes and at homes and so on, but there were still a lot of solidarity. And today the population tries to behave more or less normally, meaning that there's no very harsh reaction. So of course it has to be confirmed, but I wouldn't say that the French population is at war with itself.
Francesco, we don't yet know definitively where the perpetrators of Friday's attacks actually came from, what their nationalities were, but there's no doubt, is there? I mean, the Friday's attacks are just going to stoke further the anxiety in France about the enemy within.
Well, certainly, a certain number of politicians, as the two previous speakers said, are going to try to play this card. And in a way, the counter-radicalization or counter-violent extremism policies that are being developed in France since 2014, but that are more or less the same as what has been developed since 2006 and 2007 in the UK and even earlier in the Netherlands, are basically based upon the assumption that the entire Muslim population is at risk or is susceptible to fall prey to ideas of extremism. Now, we don't know yet exactly who these attackers were and who they were affiliated with, but what we know for sure from the previous attacks is that these were individuals connected to very specific networks who were already on the radars of intelligence services. Yeah. So in a way, I think the main premise, which is that everybody of Muslim faith is potentially concerned, is actually wrong. We know, at least intelligence services know very well who these people are, and I guess the real conversation should be about how can intelligence services do a better job of preventing these attacks, rather than trying to distribute suspicion within society.
Francesco, then, what would be your suggestion?
Well, we have seen the government roll out a series of measures, some probably helpful, some probably less helpful. Among the helpful ones are the ones who empower intelligence services under judiciary supervision to be able to carry out investigation within the boundaries of the rule of law. And certainly there needs to be a reflection, at least in the UK after the Woolwich attack, that has been clearly a reflection about how MI5 should carry out its mission. What is, in my view, and on the basis of the research that I have been doing, extremely unhelpful, because ultimately it's polarizing society and it's driving conversations underground rather than letting them in the open, is trying to focus on non-violent extremism, as it's the case in the UK, trying to make doctors, school teachers, university professors into snitches who basically are supposed to spot signs of radicalization. All of that, in my view, is absolutely not working. I think the mission of counterterrorism is best done by professionals who are trained and whose job it really is to follow these networks and to see specifically who might pose a danger.
Virginie, how does France deal with its dispossessed youth, those at the margins of society who feel voiceless, powerless, hopeless, those who may be ripe for radicalization and fall prey to the slick social media recruitment campaigns of extremist groups?
Well, actually, there are two different kinds of populations. One is the few, and apparently some of the people yesterday, those kamikaze, were very young, who are indeed radicalized. I think the rest of this population from poor neighborhoods, poor backgrounds, actually just feel abandoned by the state institutions. They feel that they are discriminated in the labor market. But that doesn't mean they necessarily are going to be radicalized. These are two, it takes, not everyone can become a terrorist, thank God. It takes one very particular, and you have experts who follow the trajectories of these individuals who will tell you exactly what it takes to become, to leave. For instance, to be a French boy who goes at 16 with no immigrant origin or no Muslim religion and goes to Syria. Thank God it doesn't happen to everyone. So these two problems are separate, I think, and we shouldn't confuse them. We will have to import, of course, some of the anti-radicalization measures that have been taken in, for instance, in Denmark or other places that have experienced attacks. But I think for the time being, we are really waiting for appeasement from the heads of states and governments. But what I want to say is Paris was attacked yesterday for sure, but not France necessarily. I think it's clear that, there was a French-German football match. Al Gore was there to prepare the environmental big conference that France is hosting or may not be hosting, in December. So I think there's also a message here that I think compared to Charlie Hebdo, this is more, I think, an attack on France, perhaps on its external policies, but also clearly France at the moment is, will be hosting this big conference, and there was also this German match. I think we should not just think about it as a Franco-French situation, or which was the case last year, of course.
Julien, if there's proven to be a link between the attacks and France's involvement in Syria, of course ISIL says it's made a claim of responsibility and says the attack was in revenge for France's action in Syria. France, of course, fighting extremism in the Sahel and lately in Iraq and Syria. If there is a link between what France is doing in Syria and Friday's attacks, how will the French government react? Will it deepen its resolve or make it more reticent about its involvement in conflicts abroad?
Well, first we have some signs that there is actually some links between our counter-terrorist actions, not in Sahel this time, but against ISIS indeed. What are these signs? These signs are, for instance, a witness who said that when he arrived at the Bataclan, he heard one of the terrorists saying that it was the president, and I quote, the president's fault, and he should not have gone into Syria. So it's, of course, a reference to the fact that France is fighting ISIS in Syria since a few months now, as well that in Iraq. So it's a first sign. And second, the communication from ISIS, the official recognition of the terror attacks, has a lot of different elements. So they speak about the fact that France is holding the flag of the cross, meaning that it's a reference to Christianity, of course. And there's a reference as well to the fact that Paris would be a completely lost city regarding to how the society behaves. So that would be more regarding to, for instance, the way we behave in the society, and the question of the veil, for instance. But there's also, with the cross reference, it's also a usual reference to the Crusaders, as Jihadi Galaxy is calling the Westerners who are acting against terrorism. So there's apparently several motivations, but one of them is, of course, the fact that we are fighting ISIS on the field.
Virginie, you wanted to say something there?
Yeah, I really think, and I know it's very early on, but that there is no question in my mind that people will support more involvement against, for instance, action from France on Daesh. That I've heard all of this morning, including shopping, saying, this time we will go after them. this time, as if we didn't do it last time, and people don't really know how much France is actually already doing in the region, but people are saying this time we're going to go after them, you know. So this question of war is a two-way story. It's like now we are at war, meaning we will fight back. So I think there will be actually some public support for foreign action, but even more proactive action from France, which sounds I don't know if it sounds strange to you, but you know, this idea of we are attacked, we will respond. I've heard it many times this morning, and I was surprised because people are still in shock and should not, you know, necessarily project what's going to happen. But François Hollande will have the support to do that, and he may have to, just to show that he's strong-willed, and not to let the right and the extreme right somehow tell him what he should be doing.
Francesco, I mean, it's too early to say what the fallout from these attacks will be. I just wonder if you think this is Europe's new reality. Are Europeans going to have to get used to security checks in public places, on the streets, stations, airports? Well, we already have them in airports, but sports stadia, anywhere that the public gathers. After Friday, people are no longer going to feel safe in such places, are they?
Well, you know, the French authorities tell us that about 3,000 to 5,000 people, depending on how you count them, are being currently in the radar of the intelligence services. About 11,000 individuals are considered to be at risk of radicalization, or at least are in a database related to radicalization. But to follow and surveil an individual 24 hours, it takes about 30 to 40 intelligence agents. If they start moving abroad, that number goes to 80. So if we were to surveil 24 hours all the people who are currently worrying the authorities, that would require about 400,000 agents. Now, obviously, the French intelligence services, DGSI, has only 3,000. So in many ways, I think the intelligence services have a daunting task, an almost impossible task to guarantee zero security. In fact, it's not a promise that they can give. So certainly there will be a step up, and it has been a step up in terms of the manpower and the competencies they have. But unfortunately, there is no possibility of guaranteeing zero risk.
All right, Julien, what is this Europe's new reality? Does security across the continent, not just in France, need a rethink?
Well, after Charlie Hebdo, there was actually some increase in the European cooperation through the European Union. So we have a mediator, we have a intel agency that does a great job, but there's a lot of services that deal with security issues at the European level. What is interesting is what we will see is that how we will cope actually to manage, to maintain security and a more efficient security without too many security everywhere would not be a good answer to that.
All right.
Meaning that it would stress out the population, and it's against the resilience of the population.
Virginie, just a final thought from you. Kids, having lived through both the Charlie Hebdo attacks earlier this year and Fridays, could be forgiven for thinking they now live in a dangerous world, a dangerous city, that they're not safe. How do you deal with a generation that's growing up feeling that way?
You must know I have a 10-year-old daughter. She was in a school that was completely locked up during the attack on a kosher supermarket very close by her school. So this is a generation that has, you know, that is the Charlie Hebdo generation. She demonstrated at age 9, with millions of people. So these kids, they're quite, I think we shouldn't underestimate both their capacity to be resilient indeed, but at the same time I think that it's quite traumatizing. But one thing that I want to say is they know, just as their parents, that putting a lot of military, the famous very expensive plan called Vigipirate or Opération Sentinelle, which costs millions and millions every day just to reassure people, which doesn't reassure them, by the way, but of having military people mobilized all over train stations, etc. We know it doesn't work. We know there are more attacks. So I think the question, just to agree with the two previous speakers, is more intelligence and more efficient security, because that's the kids are not satisfied by seeing, you know, military in front of their school. That's not going to, you know, they know it's not going to be of any use.
I'm sorry to cut you short, Virginie. We're out of time. Many thanks to all of you, Julien Théron, Francesco Ragazzi, and Virginie Giraudon in Paris and Amsterdam. Thank you for watching. As always, don't forget you can leave your comments on the programme at our page on the website aljazeera.com. You could also post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you could tweet us. We're at AJ Inside Story. Thanks for watching from me, Adrian Finnegan, and all the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.